So, dear ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome from my side on behalf of the Diagnostic Net Berlin-Brandenburg. I hope you are all joining this session, first session of today. We will have, so people are still appearing and popping up, so yeah, please come and join us. We will have two sessions today. I will start with the title you see here, right on the presentation already. My name is Jörg-M. I have the pleasure to be in the board of the Diagnostic Network of Berlin-Brandenburg, and I will take you to the first of our sessions. So, just to give you a general background, who we are and who we are speaking for. We as a Diagnostic Net of Berlin-Brandenburg are part of the cluster health capital in the capital region of Germany, so around Berlin and Brandenburg. Health capital Berlin-Brandenburg is a large and huge cluster. Here are some facts and figures of that. 21,000 people, healthcare companies, in Berlin and Brandenburg, around 380 employees in the healthcare industries, roughly 27 billion euros revenue per year in the healthcare industry, and a lot of pharmaceutical companies, more than 250 biotech companies, and around 330 medtech company and digital health companies, the latter one obviously a point of interest for the near future. So the vision is that we are setting in Berlin-Brandenburg new standards in life science and healthcare, and of course this is a purposeful cluster, so we would like to come to better products together. And in part of this healthcare, the network Diagnostic Net Berlin-Brandenburg plays a special role, a very focused role. Funded in 2007 in Hennigsdorf near Berlin. We are currently a network of 75 members, including strongly growing and highly innovative companies, diagnostic manufacturers, device manufacturers, suppliers, as well as research institutions, so applied research that conduct product-related research, clinics and medical laboratories, the one that are using everything the diagnostic can do. Law firms and consulting agencies are absolutely necessary to do what we do. This network is a very operative network, and what you see here is the basic idea. We are the all-around partner for the development of IVD. So if you have an idea or in need of a certain diagnostic tool, are in need of that, and you want to have it developed and brought on the market and distributed worldwide, then you as our customer, you see to the right, can ask the Diagnostic Network. We put up a consortium of those of our members who are able to solve the task, and then we solve the task, and you have a one-stop agency helping you out with that. Okay, so far for the introduction. Where are we today with our topic? Well, in the diagnostics, the regulatory environment has changed already. We have a small time leaving us with an old regulation, that is the IVD Directive, translated international laws and regulations. This is how the EU is working, and new, obviously, valid since May 2017 is the IVD regulation. That is the same law all over Europe, valid for all member states, and it's the IVDR 746 out of 2017. So what are the differences? I mean, that you are of the field and therefore you will be familiar with that, but I find this very impressive to compare those. While the IVDD had comprised 37 pages, now we are at 157 pages, and this is not including the additional documents that will become valid time after time. So the idea is we have much higher requirements for technical documentation. We have the performance of the IVDs have to be validated pretty much more in depth. Scientific demonstration and detailed documentation is necessary, and to sum that up, it is all about clinical evidence. And clinical evidence, and that is a big part of the talk now, has three main columns: the scientific validity, the analytic performance, and the clinical performance. So, and we go through that in detail right now. Just as a short remark, if you have any questions, please be so kind and place them directly in the chat. One of our co-workers is there, happy to respond them immediately or take them further to the Q&A session after my talk. So back to this 3 columns, the scientific validity gives you the main question: is there a relationship between the marker and the clinical condition? The analytical performance tells you whether there is a relationship between the marker and the test results. So are you measuring the right molecule? First, scientific validity: is the marker relevant for this clinical condition? Second, analytical performance: do I measure the identified marker in the proper way, technically correct with all its variations, and just picking out the variant that I need to measure to be correlated towards this disease. So, but first of all, analytical performance is just relation between marker and test results. Clinical performance then tells you whether the marker, now measured properly, is a direct correlation between the condition, the clinical condition of the patient. So is this marker indicative for a certain clinical condition? So that 3 steps are very important to differentiate. And now what you have to do to bring up a new product in the market, you have to follow this graphic basically. Overall, there's the performance evaluation plan that you have to set up. Again, you see the 3 columns. On the left side, the scientific validity, in the middle, the analytical performance study, and towards the right, the clinical performance study in the end. And that all sums up towards the performance evaluation report comprising all these 3 columns. So what do we know? What we have to do is, first of all, you have to plan, and then report, and put that together in a report. So that is quite clear and well described in the IVDR. For the literature research to tell whether a marker may be of interest for a certain diagnostic application, you have to go through a systematic literature review, and you have to show how you did that. So that is not no rocket science, but you have to see that your buzzwords are the correct ones, whether you did a complete search, whether you did not omit any critical publication. For the analytical performance study itself, after the plan and before the report to just perform those studies, well, there are the CLSI guidelines. They are from the US, but they are very helpful. You can use them, and if it's in there, then you have already an idea about an industry standard that you can use. The most question marks we have, and that is the situation that is giving the most, let's say, tension in the whole field in the moment, is the clinical performance study. How to perform that? Well, first of all, we have some aids. So the IVDR as well as the ISO 29916 is very helpful at that. So telling you precisely how to plan and how to report, but conducting, of course, is with you. There is no specification, no very explicit information about sample size or study how you shall conduct your study. The idea behind that is you have to validate your product in a way that shows that it is fit for its intended use. Sorry for the typo. The intended use therefore becomes of utmost importance, and we have to consider that very, very precisely. And I'll give you 1 or 2 examples if time is allowing that. But intended use, you have to take this into account, makes a huge difference. If you measure the same marker but tell that the assay is good for this situation or for that situation, complete difference may be in your clinical study. And it's not so easy anymore to just say, okay, yesterday I just had this on a low level, this test system, now I would like to have it in a more critical clinical condition to identify other patients. Then it may very well be that you have to perform a new clinical study to show that the new intended use is validate with your test system. There are some exceptions, so we assume that the common technical specifications that are already in place, for instance, for the list A products of the IVDD, the old one, they give clear requirements regarding number of fresh samples, archived samples, and seroconversion panels. We assume that this and the like will be part
of the IVDR as well, as soon as the notified bodies come into place and test. If we take this into account, I think we are in a safe position and take whatever we can. So clinical performance studies, two approaches: normal case, diagnosis samples is inclusion criterion. This is the normal case, so we need to have the diagnosis, and with the diagnosis as inclusion criterion, we can choose the sample. The ISO 20916 is telling you that most studies of IVD medical devices are performed using samples from resulting from the remnants of specimens taken for purpose of standard of care. So leftovers, retainers, remnant samples, however you would like to call them, what you get out of a routine lab is basically the target. So this is very much allowed to do this. It is possible, but of course the using those samples has some restrictions. First of all, it ignores the disease prevalence in the population. So depending on the intended use, this may therefore work or not work, because if you go to the physician and your sample is in the routine laboratory, obviously you have an idea that you should be tested. So recruitment of patients with known diagnosis is also quite tricky. Not all of the routine laboratories have confirmed diagnoses. Usually they have only the idea that this the laboratory result is about to decide one or the other diagnosis. So is that a given diagnosis or just an estimate? Tricky. And also how many samples for positive samples for sensitivity and negative samples for specificity. You have to estimate that by yourself. Problem is you may overestimate the test performance because you're not looking at the real world data, like the real prevalence in the population, but you have an artificial system in the routine laboratory. Therefore, maybe the test is performing better than it is then later on. We will come back to that later. You should therefore target the inclusion of distinction panels where you can differentiate between disease A and B, so the ones that should be differentiated. That is something where we will see how the notified bodies will take care about this. The alternative case, of course, is the medical indication for taking the sample is an inclusion criteria. So the real world situation where you want to go and see people arriving at the physician's office, people to be screened in the population, school settings, sports settings, whatever it is. Well, at least what the IVDR is telling us about that at least the measurement already should right now be taken under similar to the normal conditions. So it is not appropriate to measure only samples in the artificial environment of your R&D laboratory. You have to go out in the field, and if it's a home use test, you have to test for the under home use conditions. That is where this potentially will end. We will see how the notified bodies will handle that, but that is where all this will end. And also the medical indication then gives you a different number in prevalences and incidences, of course, in your population. The study uses actual target population, therefore the sample size and calculation includes the disease prevalence. X samples for both sensitivity and specificity estimation are necessary, and borderline cases are to be included. So therefore archived samples will not be viable for that because they are usually lacking that kind of information. We accept this situation to be the preferred model, and that will be pointed out in future documents that will be filed, we think, later while using or while the IVDR is truly in place and the first test kits are being certified after the IVDR. So we think that this kind of the study will be demanded from the notified bodies. So in the end, to decide between the two approaches, it depends on the quality you would like to achieve, the availability of samples, of course, and the accessibility. I mean, if it's a rare disease, it's not easy, the availability is poor, but also if the samples are accessible and, for instance, too expensive compared to what you economically would expect from the test system, maybe the accessibility is poor, and then you have to have a chance to a workaround. Yeah? And again, to come back to that again, the intended use is of utmost importance. So the same test system to be used in a screening test setting or on an individual person related setting may require completely different numbers of tests, samples, and different quality of samples. So there's room for discussion, and we have to take this into account and lead the discussion. Very important is the post-market performance follow-up. That is something new, has not been part of the IVDD before. Now in the IVDR, it is absolutely the standard. So continuous proactive collection of safety and performance data. That is mandatory in the future. Performance evaluation is never done, so it's a continuous process while the product is on the market, and as part of the post-market surveillance that is also mandatory, and it is an update of the performance evaluation that you did before you bring the test on the market. Then while it is on the market, you have to recheck and see whether your statements given in the performance evaluation to bring your test kit on the market are still valid, or whether you have a drift, a change, a different setting. And this is about technical issues, it is about clinical issues, it's about usability of the test system, and even if even in the end, how people are using your test kit, that is also important and has to be checked. So if your customers are constantly, let's say, misusing the test for a different purpose, which is not within the intended use, then you have to recheck for that. Frequency, class C and D as a risk group have to be checked annually, part of the periodic safety update report, so PSUR. And the manufacturer's own rationale, so A and B, you have to check for yourself, but you have to have a proper plan in your PMPF plan and argue why you do it like this and the frequency. It's not mandatory. You can omit some things in the performance evaluation report. Even class C products does not necessarily require a PMPF. It's depending on different situations. The example given here are, for instance, if there are a high number of standardized similar tests on the market, so a routine marker that has been measured, you can, by looking at the market, generate sufficient data. And if you don't have any quality issues, you can state that properly that this is working. So this is leaving a little bit out, leaving a little bit the tension out of the system, because that makes it very much easier. Nevertheless, you have to look at the market. Post-market performance follow-up, then again, the task is show that your product keeps performing as intended after market launch. As mentioned, systematic misuse, new safety issues, benefit-risk ratio, new risk, performance limits, contraindication, non-inferiority to current state of the art. If the current state of the art is changing rapidly, you have to follow that or take back the intended use. New mutation, demographic changes. These are, I mean, there are a lot of examples. I can give this maybe in the Q&A session, how you can judge that and what you have to take into account. So how to do this? Of course, evaluation of recent scientific literature all the time. You have to read, collect user feedback any way necessary in the framework of the ISO 9001. If your quality assurance system is working, quality management system is working properly, you have them anyway. Collect clinical experience while going on talks and listening or reading the literature. Participate in round-robin tests, of course, so performance testings, and studies and PMPF studies, which are made explicitly to check for the post-market performance. Those studies are specifically valuable if pre-launch data was gathered with archived samples only. Then it may be the good time to go to real-life data and real-world samples, so to say. Clinical performance study with actual target population was not possible at that time, rarity of disease and the like. Then it may very well be possible that there is a demand from the notified body that you generate those data post-market. So collect and use data to update performance results. Collect them is always a good idea. Next big thing to not be presented right now in the IVDR is the highest order of IVD performance, the clinical utility. And that is a specific point, and the last point for today. The actual
benefit of the diagnostic information for the patient. That is the question of clinical utility. Not being asked in a moment by the IVDR, absolutely standard in pharmaceutical part of the world, but not yet in diagnostics. But to our understanding, it will come. That includes the acceptability of the test. Is it appropriate to perform the test? The availability of treatments and interventions, also a good question. And the health economy has also been taken into account. So is it worth to do that? It depends on the diagnostic accuracy of the test, the pre-test probability, like the prevalence and the group of people to be measured, and the clinical consequences of the result. And here you see this in the graph. You have the clinical evidence on one side with the analytical performance and the clinical utility on the other side. And there is the common ground of scientific validity and clinical performance, but clinical utility is definitely the new thing. Short example, just one. Prognostic tumor marker with high analytical and clinical performance can reliably detect the risk factor for cancer, but there is no effective treatment. So there is only a psychological burden for the patient. So high clinical performance, but low clinical utility. Of course, you can take this example the other way around. To know is sometimes a bliss. So for the future decision of whatever the patient wants to do with the rest of the life or whatever, or your living conditions. So it has to be discussed on case to case and time to time. But that has to be discussed, but that is part of the clinical utility and can also be measured have a look at the population. Is the population beneficial, or is that measuring beneficial for the whole population? It's not standard in the moment, not mandatory in the moment, but it will become of future relevance as we see it. And we think that the system is already planning to bring that into place and into activity. How do we demonstrate the clinical utility? You have to do randomized clinical trials, but that is highly expensive and ethically, of course, questionable. No, in the mean of not questionable, but it's challenging. So we have to follow that, but it will come in the short or let's say mid-time future, as we see, and it is going towards a harmonization of the standards in diagnostics and pharmaceuticals. So we think that will work in that direction in the future. High amount of relevant factors to be considered: health outcomes, management strategy, behavior, emotional effects. So they may be imprecise and not easy to measure. And of course, how to get that ethically clear will be a question. In summary, there is a clear guideline for scientific validity and analytical performance, as well as planning and reporting of clinical performance studies. No details regarding the sample size and conduct of clinical performance are given yet. Statistical, ethical, and economical considerations have to be taken into account. And again, intended use changes a lot. And there are 2 levels of clinical performance studies setups. Archived specimen included on the basis of known diagnosis. This is the key point here. And prospectively collected specimens included on the basis of medical indication. So clinical performance depends upon dynamic factors, and that will be has to be represented in the PMPF in the end. So, and in the future, we have the identification of the Ds, which is not the same as the health benefit that leads to the clinical utility. Now I've given you a lot of threats, a lot of opportunities. Here are the guys who are able to help you with that. That is InVent for procuring human biomaterials, ICS for performing clinical studies, Future Diagnostics for performing analytical performance studies, Central BioHub, best source online for human biomaterial, and Engine biomarker company for identifying new biomarkers. So please be so kind and visit us on Medica Diagnostic netbb.de. You will see all of our exhibitors on the Medica. Hope you have a good show. I'm so depressed that we do not see each other face to face. As usually, Medica is a highlight of the year. So all of what we are doing is just trying to cope with that. We as a diagnostic network, we plan to support you in the future with a more broad platform where you can have easy access to everything you need in diagnostics. We do not know yet how this will look like, but that will be the future. You will be informed. Leave your mail address, talk to us, get in touch with us, and with all your diagnostic problems that you can probably face, we would be very happy to help you with. You can reach me under this coordinates, and please join again the Virtual Medica. This is all done with the kind support of the countries of Brandenburg and Berlin and the European Union, of course. And so I thank you for your time. And I think the session is open for discussion. Sorry to cut that short by taking a little bit more time than I was actually planned to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hollidt, for your kind talk. I will be the moderator today, and I already have a question. One was technical kind. Yes, the talk will be available on demand on our just mentioned webpage. And the subject-like question is, according to Article 57.2, it means that performance studies have to be performed in external laboratories in hospitals, for example? Question mark.
Oh, yeah, exactly. This is the idea. So the demand is to perform the clinical study in the planned environment where you use it. So the example is given as an example, absolutely proper. If the intended use is to bring the test kit towards the routine laboratories, then the performance study should be done, clinical performance study should be done under this routine conditions. If it is a home use test kit, you shall do it in a home use condition. If it's on the field, on the wherever, then you shall go wherever it is. What future will tell is how strictly that is implemented in the beginning. So the notified bodies by themselves are trying to get clear of that. There is a likelihood that you can start with a lot of data coming from, let's say, artificial environments or your own laboratory. Start with that and just show with a small number of samples that your test kit is also performing properly under the routine conditions or under the conditions of the intended use. That will, to my understanding, hold for the first something until the whole system gets round up and everything is moving. Everybody knows what to do, but it is clearly stated that you shall test them under routine conditions. So that will be the case in the future.
Okay, thank you. I hope this answers the question. The next question would be, please explain again the second approach to clinical performance studies. Why do you think that this will be the preferred model in the future? How is this model superior?
Yep. So let me go back to the proper. So this is again the normal case. The basic idea is that, of course, remnant samples, leftovers, however, are the prime target. They are absolutely fine using them for the analytical performance, because there you just measure the marker itself on a metrological basis. So just to say that you're measuring the right parameter and the right accuracy and precision and the like. If you go a step further, usually the remnant samples are not clear in a diagnosis, because they are going to the routine laboratory with just the question to verify and falsify hypothesis about the diagnosis to be given to the patient. So there's always the physician that has to look after, so the treating physician, not the laboratory physician, that has to take into account a lot of other information to come to a final conclusion about the diagnosis. And in the routine laboratory, usually the information is not present. So the link between the information about the diagnosis and the specific case, if you have a very specific parameter that is only holding for a subsection of a certain disease, is usually not truly and fully present with the routine laboratory. So therefore, let me go one step further here. Therefore, if you go to this alternative case, first of all, it's a similar condition, and also you go for the medical indication. So towards testing the test, like the example is, first of all, you have clear and sound information about the final diagnosis, so taking into account all the information that are only with the treating physician. And the other thing is, well, a lot of diagnoses are being done to include or exclude, a lot of times to exclude a certain clinical condition. So the physician sees a lot of patients, and it is not a question whether he is able, let's say Corona, directly identify people having SARS-CoV-2, but he wants to differentiate between SARS-CoV-2 and all the other more harmless coronaviruses. So in the real conditions, you are in the physician's office and you have a lot of patients, and that is the question. Are you able to differentiate between those, let's say, by first view, looking very similar as a disease or having the same symptoms, but then you would like to differentiate, or the physician is clear already, this is definitely this one, but to 1% of the cases, there is another disease behind it. So it looks like a classical bacterial infection, but may also be autoimmune related. And then he sends this towards a routine laboratory. With 99% being sure by himself, no autoimmunity. So, but to differentiate that, this is what we mean with the normal conditions, what you see in differentiating, and the other thing is the completeness of the medical indication and the diagnosis.
Okay, I have one more question with the short answer, please. Otherwise, we will postpone it to after Professor Dirk's talk, which should start right now. Is it possible to calculate PPV and NPV out of archived samples by using prevalence data from literature?
So good, very good question. Short answer is, to my opinion, we can start with that approach and see how far we can come. Theoretically, that should work, and therefore we would like to, we from our side would say we should try that.
Okay, all right. Maybe we can elaborate a bit more after Professor Dirk's talk. I would
thank you very much.
Thank you again. I hope you stay with us.
I do. Obviously, it's always a pleasure to listen to Professor Dirks. Christian, hello. So very much looking forward to your talk, and I switch off my video anyway. Okay.
And your screen sharing, please. Thank you. Okay, Professor Dirks, you are.
Yeah, please. There you go. Okay, thank you. I'm trying to share my screen. We'll just take a minute. Here we go.
Okay, perfect. Yes, now we see PowerPoint.
You see PowerPoint now. Okay, I will switch into presentation mode, hoping that we get the presentation mode on the screen. Or do you get the...
We still have editing mode.
Okay, I will try to switch that.
Okay, we see your screen again with editing mode.
Sorry about that. Usually there is a possibility to switch, but I can't seem to find it right now. Try again.
There should be a pop-up from below when you choose the screen to share. So
here we go.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, that was the first task of the day. Thank you very much. I'm Christian Dirks from Dirks & Company. We are an innovation consultancy in diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, and digital healthcare. And I was challenged to give you a presentation on an update and the preparation plan for the introduction of IVD under the new legal framework. And what I would like to start with is a question that we keep on getting, even though I understand that most of you might have realized what the situation is like, that transition period. And we are on the brink of this being applied. And right now, IVDs can still be certified under the IVDD and be placed on the market. But then there will be the grandfathering period of 2 years. And after that, the devices can be made available on the market, but should no longer placed on the market. And right now we are in a situation where the device conformity can indeed be assessed under IVDR. And as of the 26th of May, 2022, it will be obligatory to undergo all procedures with a new regimen. What are the current challenges? We see that 70% of the IVDs, which will in the future require a certification, are currently not obliged. And that means that we are facing indeed quite a revolution in that field. And I see that more and more companies are getting aware of the work that lies ahead of us. However, we are still waiting for a lot of the things that the Commission, MDCG, and the member states should supply, like the common specification, and a lot of implementing and delegated acts have not yet been published that we are desperately waiting for, of course. We also see that our discussion, not only recent, but discussion for a long period of time on the prioritization of unmet medical need has not yet brought about a solution in a way that we have something in the regulatory framework that would foster niche products. There's in the pharmaceutical area, we have the orphan disease preferences that can be met. There's nothing similar in IVD, and this is an issue that still needs to be debated. We also see that there's still some legal uncertainty regarding the rules of classification, and we have not yet achieved clarification on the reference laboratories, which have a lot of functions according to Article 100 of the IVDR. And yet there is little progress on the designation of the notified bodies. Another issue that we've been debating over the past years is the liability for off-label use, which is still unclear. And I'm not sure if this is going to be a problem that will be getting bigger over time or whether it will diminish with the situations that we are facing right now. So the current situation is that we must actually admit that the legal framework is not being established at the desirable rate. We have several delegated acts that are on the way and implementing acts, but not by far not what is needed. Especially there is no coordination group established exclusively for IVDs. The MDCG is still responsible for IVDs. This is fine, as this is what both regulations foresee. But most of the reports, especially if you look at the rolling plan, are still focused on medical devices, on the medical products. So the rolling plan is getting updated, not as fast as we hoped it would. I've just recently consulted. They had an update in October. And the odd thing is, if you look on the website of the EU, you will not find it. You really have to do some research to find the update of October. The website still produces the June rolling plan. And as you will see undoubtedly from the Excel sheet that you can download then, that about 8 out of 10 or literally, I think it's 3 out of the 20 lines that are part of the rolling plan are focusing on IVD, and the rest is still medical devices. We have seen that was a very recent product, the non-binding guidance on the classification rules for IVD. This was published just this month. I think it is very helpful, even though it might leave some questions open, but isn't it always like that, that it's never that we stop asking questions and new products bring about new questions all the time. The notified bodies are designated on a rolling basis. However, we still see that there's only but a few. Recent count that I saw was 4 and we are not sure as to how this will develop over the next couple months. CE marking is something I would briefly like to touch, as I understand this has been covered. The fulfillment of the general safety and performance requirements is including the performance evaluation, and for Class B, C, and D products, we also see the conformity assessment procedure as a necessity. And if we briefly look at that, the performance evaluation is indeed covered by the three aspects of scientific validity, analytical performance, and the clinical performance. And as Jörg has just pointed out, the clinical utility is something that is hovering in the background and that we are still focusing on, as we see that there's many aspects driven from the pharmaceutical area that move over into medical devices and IVD. And this is something that we should definitely focus on over the next years, how this can be established to deliver proof and evidence for clinical utility as well. The performance evaluation can be used with the studies. Jörg has gone into that at far more detail than I could do right here. And there, we are still debating on the right balance between practical design of studies and the basis of the scientific literature. We're still struggling for a fair balance concerning these differentiations. Then the recently published guidance on the classification rule is probably a very essential tool, as the consequences are, of course, tremendous. And we should keep in mind that the classification is defined by its intended purpose, and therefore, in a lot of cases, it can be moderated and modulated to what is desirable. And now we see that there is special rules for that, like in Article 50 for the Class D devices. We see that the reference laboratories will have their saying in that for high-risk devices, and that there also will be a consultation with the national medicines agencies for the companion diagnostics, which are getting of more and more importance. So what is the intended purpose then? We see that the intended purpose in the IVDR is covered in several regulations, and it's not only brought about by the labeling and the instructions or the promotional material, but also in all other sales materials or statements, and also as it's specified in the performance evaluation. So all these materials need to be watched and monitored continuously to find out that and make sure that the intended purpose is still covered by the risk classification and all the tasks that you need to fulfill in order to get a certification which is in line with the risk classification. Further, also the definition needs to be focused on, and I think we have covered that in an earlier lecture, so I will just skip the slide. Just let you know that this is also a very essential part of the procedure. Now, the interesting of the risk classification is that it addresses the individual risk as well as the risk for public health. And in this matrix, of course, it is inevitably so that we find 4 risk classes, from low individual and low public to high individual and high public risks. And here are the examples. I think most of you have made themselves acquainted with that scheme. It is actually derived from the International Committee. And we see that currently only 15% of all IVD fall within the lowest risk class, where no notified body needs to be involved. This is the orientation guide, which is not official, but it has found its way into Annex 8 for the classification. And this is what needs to be kept in mind if we address the procedures. We have also taken on the task to visualize for you the classification rules. And I will not take this step by step for the reason of time, but you see that there is some logic in this, and it should be possible to address all rules and file your products into the respective category, which will bring about, of course, different procedures. And as you see here, for the Class A product, it will be sufficient to focus on the Annex 4 EU declaration, whereas for Class B, we already need the quality management system. And this goes on and on until, of course, with the highest risk class, you need the most of evidence and documentation and assessments, as you can see on this slide. Now, I have been asked to address two issues that are fairly new. That one is the traceability. The task is that the economic operator shall be able to identify to the competent authority, the supplier, the buyer, and the health institution, basically speaking to where are my products. In order to establish that, there is a unique device identifier system established. A lot of the tasks currently carried out with the MDCG and the implementing acts focus around this UDI system. There have been established 4 bodies actually within the EU that can deal with that issue. And I think some of you might have seen the publication of the Commission from June 2016, where it says that JS1 AISBL and HIBCC, ICC-BBA, and the IFA in Germany have been assigned with the task to do the preparatory work for the unique device identifier. And the task to fulfill this is indeed quite a vast one, as there are many data that need to be collected in the EUDAMED data bank. There is more than 7 elements that are part of the continuous monitoring in this data bank, and we're waiting for it to be implemented probably by 2022. Another new issue, of course, is vigilance, the implementation of a reporting duty for serious incidents. And you will find that the deadlines are listed in Article 82. You will find the definition of the serious incidents in Article 2, para 68, I believe. And this is a duty that needs to be taken serious, of course. Then if there are risks, then of course the corrective actions shall be performed, and the data needs to be reported through the electronic system that is in the process of being set up here. So what is the rolling plan situation like for the time being? We are awaiting the rules to facilitate the fulfillment of tasks and compliance with the criteria by the EU reference laboratories. There is in progress the fee scheme for the reference laboratories, and the setting up is expected for the end of next year. In the meantime, there will be the common specifications set up by an implementing act of the Commission, which should probably be around in existence in summer, I suppose. The EUDAMED is expected to be set up in the course of 2022. It will contain different modules on actors, UDIs, the notified bodies and certificates, data on vigilance and investigations, and of course the market surveillance, where Jörg has outlined a lot of the PMPF issues that are fairly new and will be a documentary burden to many of the economical operators. However, we expect transparency and coordination by that. Now, how should a company go through this? And our suggestion is to build a team that starts with the risk classification of the products, and deriving from that risk classification, there should be the list of tasks and issues that will be addressed. Should be contact to a notified body to ensure cooperation and timely collaboration. then the work packages need to be defined and assigned. There should be timelines on which the involved team members should agree, and then action should start right away. I've also brought along with you how our company addresses the stages of market entry, from a preparational phase on the left side to establishing a company, looking for licenses and permits, addressing other markets, to a launch readiness assessment that we can do to support the step into the market and have an entry strategy, and finally go into commercialization. As we can share this slide later on, I will not bother to go into further details, but just like Jörg, I would like to thank you for your attention and would like to point out to visit the companies that are exhibiting at this virtual Medica this week. And I'm looking forward to your questions and our discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Dirks, for your nice brief talk and update to the IVDR. I already collected a few questions, but everyone in the chat, you are very welcome to post your questions or contributions towards both of our speakers, and we will have quite some time still to go into more details, probably even to the question that was only briefly answered before. The first question is, do you see a chance for a moratorium to extend the grace period for IVDR as we see for the MDR in the moment, postponed for 1 year to my knowledge?
Yes, this is, of course, an obligatory question that we get on most of our sessions on this. And I'm a bit torn here because when we discuss the prolongation of the coming into effect of MDR, I had several meetings in Brussels with people from the Commission, and they said just they cannot do it. They wouldn't do it because there's member states that are absolutely against any prolongation or setting up later dates, and they do not see how these can be overruled. And then all of a sudden, not only for the sluggishness of the system and the lack of preparation of the notified bodies, but also, of course, for Corona, which was a pretty good excuse in that matter, and which brought about many other positive effects, let alone the ghastly nightmare that it brought about. But so I'm not really sure. It could be, but we have a lot more time for the preparation. On the other hand, the task is, I think it's even bigger than it was with MDR, with so many products just not being certified as yet, not even being classified before. And so we see that there is maybe some reason to postpone it, but I'm very reluctant to go into a prognosis. If I would have to bet on it right now, I would rather not bet on any delay in this.
So we will eventually get into this bottleneck of only having a few notified bodies available for basically all in vitro diagnostic companies.
What maybe this is a situation in which I would like to go back to a suggestion that I had with the Commission, with Mr. D'Annunzio, I think was his name. And he was saying that there was some probability in that we could come up with an additional implementing act that would give the member states the liberty to extend the use of IVD in circumstances where the economic operator has tried to get into a certification process and where he can deliver proof that he has unsuccessfully tried so, and that there is timely limits to this that he cannot influence. And this in line with an assessment of the practical need to use the IVD, and that there is no other alternative to it should make it possible to extend this on an individual basis with an administrative process. But this is just a remedy, let's call it a band-aid, and not really solving the problem entirely. But this is probably a suggestion that could be developed if the situation does not relieve itself in terms of capacities.
Okay. And as far as I know, oh, I just get another question here. Does this basically mean we are queuing at the notified bodies, so to say, park the certification?
Well, I think there will be queues, yes. And if we have an agreement with the member states and the Commission that to keep up care, to keep up diagnostic procedures that are essential and that do not have an alternative, it might be useful to find an agreement that if proof is delivered, that I'm in a queue, that I'm working on it, and that there's no alternative to my product that is currently certified and available. It's not only about certification, it also needs to be available. It doesn't help us if there is 500 products per month, if we need 5,000. Then this would be a measure that I think, in outbalancing the public interest of safety, the interest of the patients to receive diagnosis and treatment, and in the interest of the investing economic operators, where we could reconcile this into another grace period until the notified bodies are well set up to take on the onslaught of this enormous procedure.
Okay, I believe Professor Hollidt would like to enlighten us a bit about the activities Diagnostic has in exactly the regard of a possible moratorium.
Yeah, just to step in, I can say again. So as a diagnostic network, for instance, we are trying together, of course, with the competent help to find a solution for our members in that way. So we think that organizing that a little bit and also to prepare ourselves. I mean, like Professor Dirks has enlightened us how cumbersome it is to prepare for the new regulation. If we standardize that as a network by ourselves and generate kind of a standard, then everybody shall go through this a little bit quicker. So there are approaches where we think that self-organization at least can do what we can do, because we are not in the hand of third parties, but we can, so to say, grab our own nose and do whatever we can. So I think everybody will hear about that in the near future.
And concerning the moratorium, or?
With the moratorium, that is, as mentioned, a very, very complicated and tricky thing, and it may very well be that queuing there or parking there may be the one solution where nobody loses his face to do so. But if you go through all of this cumbersome work of preparing your documents, on preparing studies, on preparing the technical documentation, if you, let's say, standardize that so that you're quicker with the notified body and have a less effort to go through all these regulations, then this may save time. And obviously there are some capacities, there are some demands, and the gap between this is time. So if we make things quicker and easier, then it may save time and lead to a quicker and better result.
Okay, thank you. Professor Dirks, do you want to touch on that again?
Yeah, I think the industry has indeed shown in the past that if associations like Diagnostic Net, Berlin, Brandenburg, or others, if they develop standards where the standards have not yet been pre-prepared, where they develop SOPs or other specifications that can be used in the process, that also the notified bodies are interested to pick this up and use it and create a process that might be faster than without the support of those who know best how their products work and how they can be described and documented. So this would be definitely one additional track that should be pursued.
Okay, thank you. I have yet another question. Learnings from Corona. You already mentioned Corona before, obviously. Is IVDR not too rigid to fight a pandemic?
Yeah, we have indeed learned over the past months that a lot of the regulations we have been proven too rigid to face the pandemic. And rightly so, we have some reliefs in that. Just yesterday, the new law in Germany brought on some reliefs concerning the distribution of corona testing kits and applying the tests. And if we see that there is a need to develop these things faster, it should be integrated. Right now, I do not see a specific regulation that would block developments, but we can keep this in mind. And especially, I see that the learnings that we've had from Corona are in the area of it's not only about developing diagnostics, but it's also about their distribution. It's about the documentation. And there's a lot, especially in Germany, a lot about data protection. And this is one of the current issues where we are still struggling with the authorities that when you work in such a field, you create data, you collect data, you need to process data, and there is a lot of administrational work concerning this that needs to be relieved in the future. And maybe we should, over the next 12 months, reassess IVDR concerning fast tracks that might be necessary to undergo procedures that take into account that pandemics might see a need for a fast track development of certain testing devices. Right now with Corona, that was not so much of a problem, as this is in a field which is not so highly regulated according to the risk class of the IVDD. But looking at the risk classification, we will be definitely in a higher risk class according to IVDR. And then, of course, a process of development, like we have seen with the Roche testing kit, will not be as fast as it has been with the Roche kit. Just give one example, I think very similar with the Becton Dickinson Veritor testing, which was also remarkably fast. And this could be actually part of a modeling or a use case, assuming that IVDR would have been in place. How long would have been to develop this test under similar conditions? And if there's a substantial difference, this should be addressed, as there will be more pandemics to come, I'm afraid.
So what you mentioned would be the direction into somewhat like emergency certification that we see in the US?
I'm not sure if we can copy that for obvious reasons, but the coordination between the big systems should address this to find a common denominator and to find possibilities to work together, balancing the security of the population with the risks that might derive. And of course, in testing, the risk scheme is entirely different than in treating or in vaccination. And therefore, there should be a balance, and it should start with an analysis of what it would be like under IVDR to develop a new testing kit. And there's a lot of learnings. If we see how long it took to develop testing kits years ago, or even treatment and vaccination, we are on a very steep curve. And I think the medicine technology and the companies that develop these tests, they have done a lot more to be faster than in previous times, and the regulators haven't really caught up with that speed that the companies can create, and it cannot be paralleled in the world of the regulatory framework. And this is something that needs to be worked on. And therefore, I see definitely a need to work on fast track for pandemic testing devices that should, of course, be in an outbalance of all interests involved.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Hollidt would like to answer as well. And
So,
I think there's one question remaining before we have to come to the end then.
Just to say, I couldn't agree more to what you said, Christian. And the idea of a fast track is, to my understanding, potentially already implemented IVDR, is the intended use. If you say, well, the use is restricted to what we have right now, so it's not an outperforming test kit, but a test kit under only a certain definition, and we bring it on the market then with more clarity towards the user, what we do in the moment, so that it is not the final version, it is not the one that you will expect from us in 10 years time, it is for the emergency we need it right now, and that is the intended use. And then we put a lot of work in towards the PMPF, so the post-market work that we have to do. So that might be the things that bring it together, what you said, having an emergency use, but not being able to change general legal regulations immediately, but to come up with an interpretation that is giving us an emergency release while still following the basic idea of the IVDR. I think that may be something of a compromise.
I think this is a very good starting point to look at the intended use first. Usually when accelerating procedures, it is never just one item or never just one button to push or one regulatory rule that needs to be amended, but it's rather a system. And so if we create something like a product journey and we look at the different regulations along the way, and then step by step find out where we can take shortcuts in best of public interest in outweighing the risks and potential damages, then this combination of procedures can be very short. We see this in the accelerated pathways with EMA that have been developed. It's always a combination of several measures that in the end will lead to a faster processing when the medical need is very high. And these accelerated pathways are established in the US as well, and with the EMA for pharmaceuticals, and they encompass several measures and applying several rules at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one last question before we wrap up that concerns you both, I believe. Do you believe that showing the clinical utility of a device will become mandatory in the future?
Sorry, we have only 3 minutes. Only 3 minutes. Huh?
My short answer would be yes.
My short answer would be yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind discussion. Thank you all for being around here. Now it's my task to share the screen, I believe. Let me try. And there we go. I just show you our slide again about the Medica. It's the last day, but anyways, there's still a lot of time and our website for Medica will stay online. Please visit our exhibitors. You can see all our webinars on this website as well. Just click on webinars. And yes, I thank you all for the discussion, for sticking with us, for enjoying the 2 talks. And I wish you all to have a nice Medica stay still. It's a bit longer, I believe, than usually because the closing is postponed due to the time shift in the various areas. And there won't be much building off or disruption of booths, and especially our ones will stay online for the future. So yes, visit and have a good time, stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you very much for your participation. Bye-bye.